The thing about Luciano's was that it never felt like a restaurant. It felt like the kind of place where men came to make decisions that would echo through someone's life, and women like me came to pour their drinks while pretending not to notice. I'd worked the evening shift at Luciano's for 8 months, and I'd learned the rhythm, the way certain voices dropped lower when certain tables filled, the pattern of who touched the glasses and who let them sit untouched, the micro-expressions of fear or respect that flickered across faces before the mask came back down. My name is Evangeline. 26 years old, art degree that pays nothing, waitressing job that pays enough. I live in a studio apartment with a cat named Dostoevsky who judges me silently. This is where I was supposed to be until tonight. The VIP room was empty when I arrived at 9 p.m. Good. Tuesday nights meant slower crowds, which meant I could study between tables, tucking my notebook into the small pocket of my uniform dress. I was preparing to audit a gallery restoration course, the kind of thing that makes you feel like you're building towards something, even if that something is just a reason to get out of bed. The first guests arrived at 1:15. I didn't know their names, I didn't ask. The hostess had simply nodded toward the VIP room and said, "Champagne first, water. Bring the 2018 if they ask." She hadn't made eye contact, which meant don't listen, don't remember, don't mention this shift to anyone. 5 men. 2 of them were talking quietly, their conversation in what sounded like Russian. The other 3 stood by the window, looking out at the city lights bleeding across the wet streets below. Rain had started an hour ago, the kind of rain that made everything in this city feel dangerous, like the streets had teeth. I served the drinks with practiced efficiency. Pour, smile, evaporate. No eye contact longer than a second. No sudden movements. I'd learned these rules the way other people learn their native language, not consciously, but absolutely. The oldest man, silver hair, face like he'd made decisions that cost people, gave me a nod. Acknowledgement, not kindness. I returned it and closed the door quietly behind me. 20 minutes passed. I refilled water glasses, cleared appetizer plates, arranged the next course. The work was muscle memory. My mind was already scrolling through my notes on pigment analysis when I heard the first shout from the VIP room, not angry. Panicked. The sound made something in my chest drop like a stone. I froze with a tray in my hands, watching the door. The kitchen behind me was suddenly quiet, the sus chef, the line cook, they'd heard it too. Everyone heard it. The yelling escalated. A crash of glass. Then the kind of silence that comes after violence, when the worst part isn't the noise anymore, but the absence of it. My manager appeared at my elbow, gripping my arm hard enough to leave marks. "You're done for the night. Leave through the kitchen." Now, Evangeline. I set down the tray. My hands weren't shaking, which was strange. I felt very clear, very present, like my nervous system had decided this was important and was giving me perfect focus. I walked toward the kitchen exit, and that's when the door to the VIP room opened. A man stumbled out, one hand pressed to his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers in a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. I knew I should keep walking. Every instinct trained into me over 8 months screamed to keep walking. But I stopped, I turned. He looked up and our eyes met for exactly 1 second, and in that second something passed between us. Not recognition, because I didn't know him, but something that felt like a hook embedding itself in my chest. His eyes were dark, almost black, and there was something in them that said, "You're about to change everything." Then my manager grabbed my shoulders and physically turned me around, pushing me toward the kitchen, and when I looked back the man was gone. I left through the delivery entrance, into an alley that smelled like old grease and rain. My phone stayed silent the entire subway ride home, which meant management had made calls. This was being handled. Luciano's didn't call the police. Luciano's handled its own incidents. I got to my apartment at 11:47 p.m. Dostoevsky meowed at me with the aggression of a cat who'd been alone for 7 hours. I fed him, showered off the smell of that place, and lay in bed staring at the water stain on my ceiling. Sleep didn't come for hours. What came instead was the memory of that man's eyes, and the certainty, absolute, cellular certainty, that something had shifted. Like I'd been standing at the edge of a cliff I couldn't see, and someone had just nudged me slightly forward. By morning I'd almost convinced myself it was nothing. A man got injured. It happened. I had nothing to do with it, and everything to do with it, and this contradiction would have driven me insane if I'd let it. So I didn't let it. I called Luciano's at 9 a.m. The manager picked up on the first ring like he'd been waiting. "Don't come in tonight," he said. "Take the rest of the week?" "Am I fired?" "No, just don't come in." He hung up before I could ask why, and that's when the tremor started, a subtle vibration in my chest, like something inside me had been set to a frequency I couldn't quite hear. I'd served a drink and witnessed violence, and now I was suspended from my job without explanation. In the hierarchy of restaurant workers, I understood what that meant. I was being protected, which meant I'd seen something, which meant I was in danger. The question was from what? I didn't know yet. But somewhere in the city, in an office or a car or a candlelit room where power lived, that man with the dark eyes was wondering the same question about me. Wednesday came with no news. I checked my phone obsessively, read the minor news section, scrolled social media, and finally gave up pretending I wasn't waiting for something. By Thursday, the waiting had a shape. It was late afternoon when the car showed up. Black, expensive. The kind of car that doesn't get parking tickets because people know better. It sat outside my apartment building for 40 minutes before someone knocked on my door. I didn't answer. I stood on the other side, watching the peephole, seeing the distorted shape of a man in a dark suit. He knocked twice more. Then a note appeared under my door. Miss Evangeline, Mr. Russo would like to speak with you. There is no danger. No danger. Which, of course, meant maximum danger. I didn't call the police. I understood, somehow, that the police were not the right response to a note with that signature. Instead, I texted my manager, is this real? The reply came in seconds, yes. Go. The car smelled like leather and cold air. The driver didn't introduce himself and I didn't ask his name. We drove through the city in a direction I didn't recognize, into neighborhoods that became progressively quieter. Emptier. More obviously not, for people like me. The building we stopped at was understated, 7 stories, old brick. The kind of place that blended into the industrial waterfront like it had always been there. The driver opened my door and walked me to a basement entrance. Stairs going down. A single hallway, soft amber lighting. A door at the end. The man inside was not the man I'd seen bleeding in the VIP room. He was taller, older, maybe 45, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my rent. His hands were steady as he gestured to a chair across from him. Evangeline, he said. His voice was low, smooth. The kind of voice that had given orders for so long that gentle a choice, not a default. I'm Marco Russo. I sat because my legs asked me to. You witnessed an incident Tuesday night, he continued. At Luciano's. I chose my words carefully. I was there. I didn't see much. You saw enough to make someone nervous. He poured water from a glass pitcher into a crystal glass and slid it toward me. You made eye contact with someone. You don't do that in places like Luciano's, it was noted. It wasn't intentional. Most danger isn't. He settled back in his chair with the ease of a man who'd never been uncomfortable in his life. The man you saw, the one who was injured. His name is Dominic. He's important, he was important. This situation was internal. Family matter. Family, the word landed differently than expected. Not literal, I understood. Not blood. I'm not going to tell anyone, I said. I believe you. But belief doesn't equal safety. He moved to a painting on the wall, abstract, all dark blues and violent reds. Do you know what this is? Art. It sounded stupid when I said it out loud. Rothko. Original. Worth approximately $4 million. But here's what's interesting about it. If you cut it into pieces and sold it individually, you'd get maybe 200,000. The value is in the wholeness. In the understanding that it belongs together. He turned back to me. That's how my organization works. We're whole, unified, and when someone gets hurt, when blood spills, everyone needs to understand the same story about why. Otherwise, the whole fractures. What story? I asked. That you didn't see anything, that you weren't at work that night. That Luciano's is just a restaurant. He sat on the edge of the desk, suddenly closer. The alternative is that you've seen too much, and then we have a different kind of problem to solve. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining why you're here instead of somewhere else. His eyes were dark brown, not black like the man's had been, but they carried the same weight. The man you saw, Dominic, he's curious about you. He remembers your face. He doesn't usually remember faces. This is a complication. I don't understand. Neither does he. That's why I brought you here. Marco walked back to his desk, opened a drawer and produced a photograph. Black and white. The man from the restaurant, but this time he wasn't bleeding. He was in a tuxedo at some kind of formal event, and the expression on his face was controlled in a way that suggested he'd spent years practicing it. Below the photograph was a name, Dominic Césaire. He's gonna contact you, Marco said. Probably not tonight. Maybe not tomorrow. But he will. And when he does, you need to understand what he is. What is he? The part of my organization that does what I won't do anymore. He's the enforcement. The necessary cruelty. Marco's voice didn't change, but something flickered across his face. Regret maybe, or memory. He's brilliant and he's broken and he's not going to hurt you. But he's also not going to let you go, once he decides you matter. That's his design. And you're telling me this because the kind thing to do is prepare you. He slid the photograph across the desk. And because I was young once and someone let me walk into fire with open eyes. I'm choosing to repay that. I left the building at dusk, the photograph folded inside my coat pocket. The driver took me home in silence. No one spoke. The city passed in shades of gray and amber light. Dostoevsky was waiting with his usual judgment. I fed him, sat on my bed, and waited for 3 hours to see if my apartment would be raided or if I'd be safe. Nothing happened, which was somehow worse, because Marco had given me something more dangerous than a threat. He'd given me context, a name, an image. He'd introduced me to someone I'd never formally met, and in doing so, he'd made me real to that person. Before Thursday, I'd been an anonymous waitress. After Thursday, I was a problem that required a decision. And somewhere in this city, Dominic Césaire was deciding what to do about me. Friday arrived with a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. The part of me that was still a normal person wanted to delete the number, block it, pretend none of this was happening. But the part of me that had been changing since Tuesday night, The part that had felt that hook embed itself in my chest, that part answered immediately. "Hello, Evangeline." The voice was lower than I expected, measured. With an accent I couldn't place, Italian maybe, or something wrapped up in Italian. There was something musical about how he said my name, like he was testing the sound of it in his mouth. "How did you get this number?" I asked. "Does it matter?" It didn't, and we both knew it. "Why are you calling?" "Because I've spent the last 72 hours thinking about someone I've never met, and I'm not a person who tolerates distraction well." A pause. I could hear him breathing, the slight shift of movement. "So either this ends or it begins." "Ends how?" "You disappear. I make sure you're safe, you move somewhere quiet, outside the city, and you build a life where you never think about Tuesday night again. You'd be comfortable, protected, free, and begins how? You see me. You understand what you're actually looking at instead of wondering. You let this." He seemed to search for a word. "Unfold." I should have chosen disappearance. I know that now. I should have taken the safety and the money and the clean break. But I thought about Marco's painting, about how cutting something beautiful into pieces destroys it, and I thought about the man bleeding in the VIP room looking at me like I was the answer to a question he'd just asked. "Begins," I said. He was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. "Saturday, 9 p.m. There's a gallery on Merchant Street. The corner building, black glass. Tell no one." The line went dead. I spent Saturday morning in a state of elaborate denial. I went to the bodega. I watered my dying plant. I read 3 chapters of a novel I couldn't focus on. At 5 p.m., I started the slow process of choosing what to wear, which somehow felt more intimate than any of this. Not a dress, he'd seen me in my waitress uniform, and a dress felt like I was trying to become someone else. Jeans, a black silk blouse I'd bought 2 years ago and never found an occasion for. Dark lipstick that made me look older, sharper. Less like someone who served champagne and more like someone who might actually deserve to be in the same room with whatever Dominic Césaire was. The gallery was exactly what he'd described: corner building, black glass, impossibly elegant. The directory inside listed 6 galleries. His name wasn't on any of them. I went to the rooftop, because the directory had said 7, and 7 didn't exist on the building layout, and something in my body just knew. The roof was open to the sky, and Dominic was waiting in the center of it. He'd changed from the photograph. The tuxedo had been armor. This was closer to truth. Dark jeans, a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and even in the fading light I could see the white bandage wrapped around his left shoulder where he'd been shot. He'd recovered faster than seemed medically possible, which told me something about his body and his pain tolerance. "You came," he said. Not surprised, satisfied maybe. "You shot someone." The words came out before I could edit them. "In a restaurant. On a Tuesday night?" "Yes." "Why?" He moved closer slowly, like he was approaching something fragile. "That's the question that brought you here, isn't it? You want the story, the justification. You want to know if I'm the kind of person you can afford to be near? Aren't you?" "No." He stopped 2 feet away. "But you already knew that. Marco wouldn't have sent you to me if I was the kind of person you could afford to be near. Marco didn't send me. I chose. You chose because Marco gave you the frame that made choosing feel possible." He tilted his head slightly, studying me. "He's good at that. He's a builder. I'm a tool. And tools don't get choices. Tools get wielded until they break." "That's very dramatic." Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "You think I'm dramatic? I think you're trying to intimidate me into leaving." "No. I'm trying to be honest. In about 3 minutes I'm going to want to touch you, and then honesty becomes difficult." He pulled off his bandage slowly, revealing the raw wound beneath, the careful stitches, the violent history of it. This was a test, a message. The man I shot was loyal to someone who wanted to challenge my position. I made an example of him. And now he's recovering and he's still loyal, because that's what pain buys you, either obedience or hatred, and I chose the middle. He looked at the city lights spreading below us. "What I'm trying to tell you is that I'm capable of things that will horrify you. That whatever feeling you have, right now it could be destroyed if you keep walking toward me." "Okay," I said. "Okay. I understand. Thank you for the warning." I stepped closer. "Is there anything else?" He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and I haven't decided which. Maybe both. Does it matter?" "Usually it does. Right now, no." He reached out slowly, and his hand found my face with the precision of someone who'd been planning this for 3 days. His palm against my cheek was warm, calloused, and his thumb traced my jawline like he was reading something written there. "What's your name?" "Your real name, not the one you tell people in restaurants." "It's Evangeline. That's real. Middle name, Lucia." He closed his eyes. "Of course it is." Then he kissed me, and it wasn't cinematic or gentle. It was urgent and rough and tasted like cigarette smoke and something darker, like the kind of kiss someone gives when they're already decided to destroy themselves. My hands came up to his chest and I could feel his heartbeat, fast and heavy, and I understood that he'd been affected by those 72 hours as thoroughly as I had. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. "This ends badly," he whispered. "You should know that going in." "How badly?" "The kind of bad that rewrites your life." Then I need to understand what I'm saying yes to, I said. I need to know who you are, not the part you show Marco, not the part that shoots people in restaurants. The real part. He was quiet for a long moment, the city humming below us, the rain starting up again, falling against the black glass like it was trying to get in. The real part. He said finally. He's still deciding if he's going to let you survive knowing him. And I realized that was the truest thing he could have told me. Everything changed after the roof. Not immediately, but like water pressure building behind a dam slowly, inevitably, until the structure itself started to groan. Dominic called me twice a day. Simple calls, nothing sexual or urgent. He'd describe what he was eating, ask what I was reading, tell me about a building he'd passed that had interesting architecture. On the surface, it was intimate. Underneath, it was reconnaissance. He was learning me, my voice at different times of day, how I sounded when I was tired versus anxious versus happy. He was building a map of my nervous system. Monday I returned to Luciano's. My manager seemed relieved, like my absence had created a void that needed filling. The dinner shift moved in its usual rhythm: pour, serve, clear, disappear. But now there were new rules written in the margins of that ritual. 2 men came in at 8 p.m. and sat in a corner where they could watch the whole room. They ordered nothing, just water, and they never took their eyes off me. When I mentioned it to my manager during a break, he said, "Don't acknowledge them. Don't talk to them. Just work. They're keeping you safe." From what? From people who might want to use you. I understood then. Dominic wasn't just calling me. He was building walls around me, not to contain me, but to protect me from the parts of his world that wanted to use the fact that I mattered to him as leverage. Wednesday brought the first real danger. I was walking home from the subway, taking the long route because the rain had stopped and the city felt almost beautiful in the November dark, when a car pulled up beside me. Not the car from before. This one was deliberately unremarkable. The window rolled down. "Get in," said a voice that wasn't Dominic's. "Dominic sent us." I kept walking. The car matched my pace, as Evangeline. "We need to go now." If Dominic wanted to see me, he'd call. The door opened and a man stepped out, medium height, scarred face, the kind of person who'd survived multiple kinds of violence. He reached for my arm, gently but with the absolute certainty that I would be moved. I screamed. Loud, clear. The kind of scream that made windows light up in nearby buildings. The man stopped, suddenly aware that we weren't alone anymore, that the street had eyes. He let me go, got back in the car, and they drove away. My phone rang before I reached the next block. What happened? Dominic's voice was cold, the warmth from the rooftop completely gone. I explained. I walked while talking, my heart still elevated, adrenaline making everything sharp and immediate. "They were gonna hurt you," he said. "They didn't even touch me. Because you screamed. Because you're smart enough to create a complication." There was something violent in the way he said it, anger at himself, maybe, or at the situation. "We need to move you." "Move me where?" "Somewhere safer than your apartment." "I'm not leaving my apartment, Evangeline." "No. I understand what's happening. There's a war or a challenge or a power restructuring, and I'm a liability because I matter to you. But I'm not giving up my life because other people made you into something dangerous. I made myself dangerous," he said quietly. "And that was before I met you. This is what you're looking at. This is the beginning of the ending I warned you about. Then tell me how to survive it." He was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted lower, more controlled, the voice of someone moving into calculation mode. "Stay at Luciano's. Stay where there are people and witnesses. Don't take unusual routes. Let the security team follow you." "And Evangeline?" "Yes. Don't touch anyone. Don't speak to anyone who approaches you. If you see someone you don't recognize twice, I want to know immediately." "Dominic, promise me." I promised. The security presence became more obvious after that. 2 men at Luciano's, always in different positions. A car parked outside my apartment building at night. Random people on the street who looked up when I passed, taking my photograph with their eyes. It was suffocating and reassuring in equal measure. Thursday night, Marco called. "Dominic's enemies are testing him," he said without preamble. "They want to see if attachment will weaken him, if he can be leveraged. What do they want? Territory. The docks. A shipping operation we've spent 30 years building. Dominic is holding the line, but it's costing him." A pause. "It's costing you too, I imagine. I can handle it. Can you?" Marco sounded genuinely curious. "Because in my experience, civilians break differently than soldiers. You're breaking more beautifully, but you're breaking." He wasn't wrong. I could feel it, the way stress had started to live in my shoulders, the way I jumped at certain sounds, the way crowds made me anxious and isolation made me desperate. I was being slowly deformed by proximity to Dominic, and I couldn't decide if I was being remade into someone stronger or just destroyed more slowly. Friday, Dominic finally showed up in person. I was closing Luciano's, counting the register, when he appeared in the kitchen like he'd materialized from shadow. The sis chef looked up, went pale, and suddenly found something urgent to do in the freezer. "We need to talk," Dominic said. I followed him outside into the November night. The street was empty except for security, his security positioned where they could watch but not hear. "There's a man coming to the city." he said without preamble. His name is Victor. He's from another family and he's been contracted to either turn me or eliminate me. He's very good at both. What are you going to do? Stop him. How? Violently. In ways that will traumatize you if you witness them. He stepped closer, and in the streetlight I could see the exhaustion living in his face, the weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. So I'm asking you to go somewhere safe. For a week, 2 weeks. Until this is finished. And if I say no, then Victor will use you to get to me, because he's smart enough to understand that you're the one thing I can't replace. Maybe you should let me go then. Clean break. Problem solved. His hands gripped my shoulders hard enough to leave marks. Is that what you want? I could have lied. I should have. Instead I said no, but I understand why you're offering. Then trust me. Come with me tonight. There's a house upstate, safe, quiet. And you. I'll handle this. Then I'll come find you. He was asking me to disappear while he fought a war. He was asking me to have faith that he'd survive it, that he'd come back, that the ending he'd promised would be dark wouldn't actually be a death. Okay, I said. He pulled me close and I felt the tremor in his body, the first real crack in the control he'd built around himself. I'm gonna lose you, he whispered into my hair. I can feel it. I'm gonna do something unforgivable and you're gonna leave me and I'm gonna deserve it. Maybe, I said. But not tonight. We had 4 hours before dawn. 4 hours before the house upstate, before the waiting, before the actual breaking started. In those 4 hours everything else finally happened. The house was built into a hillside, all stone and glass and careful isolation. It existed in a state of controlled forgetting, far enough from the city that the noise couldn't reach us, close enough that Dominic could still manage his empire through phone calls and encrypted messages. We arrived before dawn, and he showed me through rooms that felt more like a museum than a home, expensive furniture that looked unused, art on the walls that nobody actually needed, a kitchen that had never fed anyone. It's been here for 15 years, Dominic said. I've never spent a night. You're the first person I've brought here. Why? Because it's safe, untraceable, and because I wanted you somewhere that's only mine. He dropped a bag on the floor, my things, collected from my apartment by someone I'd never meet. There's a security system. Cameras on the perimeter. The nearest neighbor is 2 miles away. You're locking me in. I'm protecting you from the choice to leave. It sounded romantic if you didn't think about it too hard. Beneath the surface, it was control dressed in the language of care. I was going to be a prisoner, and he was going to be my jailer, and we were both pretending it was something else. How long? I asked. Until it's done. Days, probably, maybe a week. He moved to the window, looking out at the dark landscape. I can't stay. I have to go back tonight. Then why bring me here? Because if you're away from the city, they can't use you as leverage. And because I wanted. He turned back to me and I saw something break in his expression. A moment of pure vulnerability that he couldn't quite control. I wanted to know where you were sleeping. I wanted to know you were safe. I wanted something from this that isn't about strategy. I understood then that he was just as trapped by this as I was. Maybe more. I was a civilian who could still walk away if I was brave enough. He was a tool that had somehow developed the capacity to suffer when wielded, and that was infinitely more terrible. I don't have a phone, I said. I know. So I can't contact you? No. But I can contact you. There's a satellite phone in the study. I'll call when I can. He stayed until 7 a.m. We didn't talk much after that. We moved through the house like we were saying goodbye without saying the actual words. I watched him in doorways, memorized the pattern of his breathing while he slept for a brief, restless hour on the couch, noted the small habits that made him human, the way he ran his fingers along the walls when he walked, the way he read the security status updates like they were personal messages, the way his shoulders loosened just slightly when he was near me. At 7:05 he kissed me goodbye and it tasted like consequences. Don't try to leave, he said. The gate is secured. The alarm system will alert me, and then I'll have to come get you, and then I'll have to make a very hard decision about what comes next. You'd hurt me. No. But I might hurt myself. And that would be worse. He was already moving toward the door, already pulling on his coat, already becoming the tool again instead of the person. The kitchen has food. There are books. There's a room with a piano. I don't know if you play, but it's there. Try to be okay for a few days. What if something happens? Nothing's gonna happen. But if it does, it won't. He left and the door closed, and I heard the lock engage electronically. I was alone in a house that cost more money than I'd make in a lifetime, and I was trapped as thoroughly as if the walls were made of concrete instead of glass. The first day passed in a state of luxurious numbness. I explored the house, discovering that every room was exactly as sterile as the last. I took a shower with water that fell from a rainfall shower head, dried off with towels that probably cost more than rent, and looked at myself in a mirror that was slightly too large to be entirely comfortable. I looked like someone who'd been remade. My eyes were harder, my face thinner, my whole expression marked by the last week of fear and tension. I looked like a woman who'd been caught by something, and was still deciding if she wanted to break free. The piano was in the music room on the second floor. It was a Steinway black lacquer, utterly perfect. I sat down and played scales first, then the Chopin nocturne I'd learned in college, then a piece of my own composition that I'd abandoned 3 years ago, because I thought I'd moved past needing to make art. The music filled the house like a ghost. It echoed down hallways and through empty rooms, proof of life in a place that was built for silence. The satellite phone didn't ring until evening. "You're playing," Dominic said, without greeting or explanation. He'd been listening through the security system. "I found a piano." "I know. I wanted to hear what you'd do with it." There was something gentle in his voice, something that suggested he was calling from somewhere quiet, somewhere he could be almost human. "What are you playing?" I told him, and he was quiet while I played the nocturne again, performing it for an audience of one who was physically absent, but completely present through the phone connection. When I finished, he said, "Don't leave the house. Don't try to contact anyone. I need you to be invisible and safe while I make this work." "What exactly are you making work?" "Something that might destroy us both, or save us. I won't know until it's finished." "That's not very reassuring." "No, it's not. But it's honest, and you said you needed honesty." We talked for another hour, about nothing substantial: books, music, the weather, the kind of conversation that builds intimacy without requiring vulnerability. Then he had to go, and the line went dead, and I was alone again with the ghost of him hanging in the air. I slept in one of the upstairs rooms, a bedroom that was clearly never used, in a bed that was very expensive and very empty. In the morning, I understood that time would move differently here, that days would blur together, and the longer he didn't come, the more the house would begin to feel like a prison rather than a sanctuary. I had no way to know how long I'd have to wait. I had no way to know what was happening outside these walls. I only knew that somewhere in the city, Dominic was doing things that would bring him back to me broken, or not at all. On the third day, the security system was breached. I didn't hear it happen. I was in the study, reading something I'd found on a shelf, a biography of someone important whose name I forgot immediately when the lights went out. Not dimmed. Out. The house became a different creature in darkness. All the expensive glass became mirrors reflecting nothing, and the stone walls turned medieval, and I was suddenly acutely aware of how isolated I was, how far from any help, how dependent on a man who wasn't here. The lights came back on after 6 seconds, and a figure was standing in the doorway. Not Dominic, someone else. A man with scarred hands and the kind of face that had experienced every type of cruelty and survived all of it. Victor, I understood immediately. The man Dominic had warned me about. "Don't move," he said in accented English. "Scream and I'll explain why you shouldn't have." I didn't move. I didn't scream. "You are Evangeline," he said. It wasn't a question. "Wes." He moved into the room slowly, examining me like he was assessing inventory. "Do you love him?" "I don't know." "Good answer. Honesty is useful." He sat in the chair across from me, completely at ease. "I'm gonna tell you something he wouldn't. Dominic isn't capable of love. He's capable of obsession, of protection, of building walls around something because it matters strategically. But not love. Love requires vulnerability, and Dominic hasn't been vulnerable since he was 12 years old. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand the choice you're making. He's going to tell you he loves you. He might even believe it. But what he actually is a man who broke so completely that he had to become a weapon, and weapons don't love, they just destroy more carefully. If that's true, then why are you here? Why would he send me away unless I mattered?" Victor smiled. It was the least comforting thing I'd ever seen. "You matter as leverage. You matter as weakness. And most importantly, you matter because he's already decided that if he loses you, he's willing to lose the city, the empire, everything he's built. That's not love, beautiful girl. That's self-destruction with a pretty name." He stood, and for a moment I thought he was going to hurt me. Instead, he pulled out a phone and placed a call. "I have her," he said when someone answered. "Yes, at the house. And she's intact." I understood what he'd done. He'd shown me that his threat was real, that my sanctuary was penetrable, that safety was an illusion I'd been living inside. The call took less than a minute. After he hung up, he looked at me with something almost like pity. "He's coming," Victor said. "He's coming alone, which means he's going to die. Because I'm not here to negotiate with Dominic. I'm here to end him, and you are the reason he'll let me." Then he left through the same way he'd come, and the security system sealed behind him, and I was alone again with the knowledge that the next time someone arrived, it would be either Dominic or a corpse. The call came through the satellite phone 30 minutes later. "Don't talk," he said. "Just listen. Victor is coming to the house. I'm gonna meet him outside, and we're gonna settle this between us. I need you to go to the basement. There's a safe room behind the wine cellar. Security code is 0911. The door locks from the inside. You're gonna go inside, lock the door, and you're not coming out until I come get you. Dominic, not coming out. Not for anyone except me. You understand? If someone tells you I'm dead, you stay inside. If someone tells you the house is burning, you stay inside. If you hear screaming, you stay inside. The only thing that gets you out of that room is my voice saying the code word Lucia. That's your middle name. That's the only word that matters. What if you don't come back? Then you wait until the security company breaches the house, which will happen within 72 hours of the alarm going off. You'll be safe. Someone will come. Dominic, I know what you want. I want the same thing, but this is what we have instead. Go now. The line went dead. I was shaking as I descended into the basement. The stone walls pressed close, and the air smelled like expensive wine and earth. The safe room was exactly where he'd said, a door hidden behind the wine cellar, disguised so completely that you could walk past it 100 times and never notice. The locks engaged behind me with a sound like finality. The room was small, maybe 12 by 12, with a chair, a bed, a bathroom, and emergency supplies. Very comfortable, very contained, a cage designed for royalty. I sat on the chair and waited. For the first hour nothing happened. Then I heard it, car doors, voices, the sound of someone arriving at the house. I couldn't make out words, just the rhythm of confrontation. Then it started. Screaming, no, not screaming, shouting. And beneath that, the dull thud of violence, repetitive and brutal. I covered my ears. I turned up the small television in the corner. Some mindless show that meant nothing. I tried to pretend I couldn't hear the sound of a man being destroyed. The violence lasted for 17 minutes by the clock on the wall. Then silence. Then nothing. For 6 hours nothing. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if Dominic was alive, if Victor had won, if I was waiting in a tomb for someone who would never come back. The speaker crackled. Lucia, said a voice that was barely recognizable. I was opening the safe room door before the word finished echoing. Dominic was standing in the doorway, and he was broken, his left arm hanging wrong, his face split open in at least 3 places, his clothes soaked with blood that I couldn't immediately determine the source of. We need to move, he said. Victor's associates will come for him. We have maybe an hour. Your arm, dislocated. I'll deal with it. He gripped my face with his right hand and made me look at him. We're leaving. There's a car outside. We're driving east. We're not stopping. Dominic, you need a hospital. I need to get you out of here alive. Hospital comes later. Run. We left the house, and he drove with one hand while the other hung uselessly at his side. The November night stretched out endlessly, and somewhere behind us, the world was catching fire. He'd come for me. He'd fought a man designed to kill him, and he'd won, and the first thing he thought about was getting me to safety. I didn't know if it was love, but it was the closest thing I'd ever seen to it. We drove through the night and into the gray morning, and Dominic made exactly 0 mistakes in his driving despite having only one functional arm, and being in obvious, severe pain. His face was a mask of control, but I could see the tremor in his jaw, the way his breathing shifted, the small tells that suggested he was catastrophically damaged underneath. Pull over, I said finally. No. You're gonna crash. No, I'm not. Dominic, your arm is hanging at an angle. That means. I know what it means. It means my shoulder is dislocated and probably has nerve damage. I know. Keep your voice down. I did, but the tension in the car became a third presence. Witness to 2 people trying to pretend that one of them wasn't falling apart. We made it to a small town at the edge of the state. Dominic pulled into the parking lot of a motel that looked like it was built to ask no questions and remember nothing. He turned off the engine and slumped in the seat. And that's when the control finally broke. He was crying. Not dramatically, not with sound, but with the kind of tears that come from somewhere so deep that the body just can't contain it anymore. Tears of pain, of relief, of every emotion he'd been suppressing since the moment Victor walked into the house. I reached over and held his right hand while he fell apart. What do we do? I asked. I need to call Marco. I need to make sure he knows I held the territory. I need to make sure the business operations. What do we do about you? He looked at me, and in that moment, all the careful construction of the man who'd seemed invulnerable cracked wide open. Beneath was someone much younger, much more broken, much more human. I don't know, he said. I've never been this and survived. I've never had something that mattered more than the organization. I don't know the protocol for that. There is no protocol. There's just, what comes next? He leaned back in the seat, and I could see the pain radiating through him like a physical thing. I need a doctor. The kind who doesn't ask questions. There was a clinic in the town, run by an older woman named Dr. Reel, who seemed to understand immediately that Dominic was the kind of person who showed up broken and expected to be fixed discreetly. She didn't call the police. She didn't ask for insurance. She just called her nurse and set about putting his shoulder back together. I watched from the corner of the treatment room, seeing the parts of Dominic that he'd kept hidden. His body was a geography of violence, old scars, new wounds, a bullet wound in his ribs from something he'd never mentioned, surgical lines that suggested he'd survived things that should have killed him. How many times have you been shot? Dr. Reel asked while she worked. 4 times that required surgery, 2 others that didn't. And you're still walking. Because walking was mandatory. The procedure took an hour. She reset the shoulder with a technique that made Dominic's jaw lock, wrapped the entire shoulder and arm, and prescribed pain medication that he took a single dose of before deciding he didn't want to be medicated. The arm's gonna need physical therapy, she said. Real physical therapy, not the kind where you ignore it because you're tough. I understand. She packaged him up and sent him back to the motel, and we checked into room 14 because Dominic always wanted rooms that were double digits but not prime numbers, which was the kind of nonsensical detail that made him feel real to me. I cleaned his wounds while he sat shirtless on the edge of the bathtub. I saw, in the harsh bathroom light, exactly what he was, a man who'd been weaponized so thoroughly that his body barely registered pain anymore, who'd learned to function in states of injury that would have disabled normal people. "Talk to me," I said while I was taping a wound on his ribs. "About what? About why you do this, about what you're protecting by being willing to break like that." He was quiet for a long moment. My father was a businessman, legal, well-respected, connected to people in the city government, very successful. I had every advantage: schools, languages, opportunities. And then when I was 12, someone from a rival family decided to send a message. They took me. I stopped moving. My hand stilled on his skin. 3 days. He continued, his voice completely flat, like he was reading from a report. "I was with men who taught me that softness is a liability, that pain is information, that you can endure almost anything if you decide that you will. They were going to kill me." Then Marco showed up. He negotiated my release, and when I came out of that situation, my father took one look at what I'd become and decided he didn't recognize me. Dominic. He was right to refuse me. The person who went in was a child. The person who came out was a tool. My father couldn't deal with that. So I went to Marco, and he put me to work, and I became what I was designed to be. He finally looked at me. "When I met you, something started happening that I didn't understand. You made me want to be human again. You made me remember that there used to be a person inside this machine. There still is. As there." He studied me like I was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Or did I just fool both of us into thinking there was? I kissed him because I didn't have an answer. It tasted like exhaustion and pain medication and the metallic tang of blood. It tasted like two people who'd walked into fire, and were still surprised to be burning. "What happens now?" I asked against his mouth. "Now I call Marco and tell him Victor is handled. Then I figure out how to keep you safe without keeping you in a house that you're imprisoned in. And us." He pulled back enough to look at me directly. "There is no us yet. There's just two people who decided not to be alone. Whether that becomes a nest depends on whether you can accept what I am. I think I already have." He shook his head slowly. "You've accepted the version of me that suffered to protect you. But there's another version, the one that made the decision to take you from your apartment. The one that looked at you and thought about leverage instead of love. I haven't shown you that version yet. Then maybe you should. That would be the worst decision you've ever made." "Probably," I agreed. "But I've decided to make it anyway." He stood and pulled me close, and we stood like that in the bathroom of a motel in a town whose name I'd already forgotten. And he felt like something I'd been missing my whole life without knowing it was possible to miss it. The phone rang before anything else could happen. Marco, demanding to know where Dominic was, what his status was, what the operational damage assessment looked like. Dominic answered in Italian, and I heard the shift back into the language of business, of power, of the world he lived in and couldn't escape. I realized, listening to him negotiate between being a man and being a weapon, that he was never going to fully choose one or the other. I was going to have to learn to love both versions. We returned to the city 5 days later. Dominic's arm was healing faster than Dr. Reel had predicted, but he was favoring it still. And the pain was obvious even when he tried to hide it. He'd called ahead, and Marco was waiting in an office that smelled like leather and very expensive coffee. "Victor?" Marco asked immediately. "Handled." "How handled?" "Permanently." Marco nodded like this was satisfactory, and something passed between the two men that I couldn't quite interpret. Acknowledgement, maybe. Respect. The kind of understanding that comes from having survived multiple wars together. "The family is consolidating," Marco said. "His associates are scattering. His infrastructure is being absorbed. You held the line, Dominic. This is good work. I didn't do it alone." Marco's eyes flicked toward me, sitting in the corner, trying to be invisible. "I'm aware," he said. "Which is why we need to discuss what comes next." Dominic took a step forward, and the protective response was so immediate that I could see Marco register it. This wasn't the Dominic who followed orders without question. This was someone new, someone who had something to protect besides the Empire. "There is no comes next, where she's concerned," Dominic said. "She stays with me. That's not negotiable." "I'm not suggesting it is," Marco replied calmly. "I'm suggesting that bringing her fully into your life means she needs to understand what that actually entails. It's not movies and romance. It's knowing things about our operations that makes her a liability. It's understanding that there are people who will use her as leverage against you for the rest of your lives." "I'm already aware of that," Dominic said. "Are you prepared for it?" The question hung in the air between them. I saw Dominic calculate the cost, the safety he'd have to forfeit, the constant threat he'd be exposing me to, the reality of living within a criminal empire as the partner of its primary enforcement mechanism. "Yes," he said finally. "Then she needs to be more than safe. She needs to be dangerous in her own right. She needs to understand the game well enough not to be used. Which means she needs to learn what we are." Marco turned to me. Can you do that, Evangeline? I don't know, I answered honestly. But I'm willing to try. That's not the same thing. No, I agreed. But it's the only honest answer I can give you. Marco nodded approvingly. Good, then welcome to the family. Though I use that term loosely, we're really more of a carefully structured organization of people who've learned to kill for profit and call it loyalty. He was joking, probably, but there was enough truth underneath it that the joke became a kind of confession. The next week was education. I met with members of Dominic's operation, attended meetings I had no business being in, learned names and territories and the intricate web of corruption that kept the city functioning. I discovered that the chief of police had 3 houses paid for by Dominic's family. I learned that half the zoning board was owned. I understood that the city's entire infrastructure was built on a foundation of careful, practiced crime. It was horrifying and logical in equal measure. Dominic was a different person when he was working. Colder, faster, more lethal. He made decisions about people with the speed of someone who'd dehumanized them first. I watched him order the removal of a witness. Watched him orchestrate a shipping deal that was obviously covering weapons movement. Watched him be every terrible thing Marco had suggested, and I stayed. Because underneath the violence, I could still see the man who'd come to get me at the house. Who'd been willing to destroy himself rather than let me fall to someone else's hands. Who called me at 2 a.m. when he couldn't sleep and asked me what I was reading, just to hear my voice. The contradiction was unbearable, and it was the only thing that made sense. On the 10th day back in the city, everything fell apart again. We were in his penthouse, a space that floated above the city with nothing between it and the sky but glass. I was standing on the balcony, looking down at the lights below when I heard the gunshot. Not from outside. From inside. I ran toward the sound and found Dominic on the floor of his study, blood blooming on his left thigh, his face twisted in fury. What happened? I screamed. A man was standing in the corner, gun lowered, looking stunned. Before I could even process who he was, Dominic had moved, faster than someone should be able to move with a gunshot wound, and had the man pressed against the wall, had the situation contained. Get out. Dominic said to me, not until you tell me what. Get out. I left. I waited in the bedroom while I heard the sounds of violence from the next room. It lasted 5 minutes, then silence. Then Dominic appeared in the doorway bleeding, his arm moving better than it had any right to. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice calm in the way that suggested he'd separated himself from what had just happened. I pressed a towel to his leg and waited. That was my brother. My younger brother, who I thought was dead. He's apparently alive and has decided that the best way to reunite with me is to murder me and take the organization back from Marco. He's still alive. No, I absorbed this. My hands were shaking as I wrapped the wound, trying to be clinical about the fact that Dominic had just killed his own brother in front of me. How did you know he was coming? I didn't. That's the part that's going to be a problem. He leaned back on the bed, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical pain. If I didn't know he was alive, there are other things I don't know. Other weaknesses. Other people who've decided to move against me. What do we do? He looked at me, and something ancient and tired lived in his expression. We do what we're supposed to do. We prepare for the next attack. We assume everyone might be an enemy. We trust no one, including me, especially you. That's the mercy I'm trying to give you right now. He reached over and touched my face, his hand coming away with his own blood. You should leave. You should run while you still can, because the next attack might be the one that catches you. And I can't lose you and stay functional. I can't lose you and remain human. Then I guess you're lucky I'm not going anywhere. His laugh was broken, but it was genuine. You're insane, probably. You're gonna regret this. I already do. But not enough to change my mind. He pulled me down beside him, and we lay on the bed with his blood soaking through the sheets, and neither of us cared because the alternative, being apart, was infinitely worse. The city was gonna burn. I could feel it coming like a change in pressure. And Dominic was going to be at the center of it, and I was going to be at his side, and we were both going to do things we couldn't take back. But for now, in this moment, we were together. And that was enough. The war came in increments. First, a warehouse burned. Then a shipment of product went missing. Then someone tried to assassinate Marco. And Dominic spent 72 hours finding the people responsible and making sure they understood the cost of failure. I watched all of it from a distance, understanding that there was a line between what I could witness and what would break me. Dominic protected that line, keeping me one step removed from the worst of it, while still making sure I understood that the worst of it existed. 3 weeks after his brother's death, we were having breakfast when Dominic's phone buzzed. He checked it and his entire body went still. What? I asked my father. He said quietly. He's dying. Stage 4 cancer, apparently. Has maybe days left. Where is he? A hospital. Private room. Which means Marco is probably already managing the situation. He set down his phone and went back to his coffee, like he just received a weather report instead of news about the approaching death of his parent. I should go see him. Do you want to? No. But I'm gonna anyway because that's the kind of thing people do. The hospital room was exactly as sterile as you'd expect for a man with unlimited money and unlimited connections. His father looked like a photograph of himself that had been left in the sun too long, all faded edges and reduced to essential shapes. He was conscious when we arrived, which seemed unfortunate for everyone involved. "Dominic," he said, his voice barely a rasp. "You came. I heard you were dying, seemed important." His father smiled, which was somehow worse than if he'd been angry. "You're so hard." "When did you become so hard?" "When I was 12 and some of your business associates decided to use me as a teaching tool." The old man flinched. "I never wanted that for you. I wanted you to be." "I know what you wanted," Dominic said, not unkindly. "You wanted me to be untouched by what you were involved in. But that was never possible. The moment you got into bed with people like Marco, the moment you built your career on bribes and corruption, you made sure that anyone close to you would pay the price eventually. Are you here to blame me for your suffering?" "No. I'm here because there's a man standing behind you, and he needs to ask you something about the accounts. And then I'm going to watch you die, and then I'm going to handle the funeral. And then I'm going to decide whether I'm going to honor your legacy, or burn it to the ground." The business was quick, Marco's representative asking questions about money, passwords, connections. His father answered mechanically, understanding that he no longer owned anything and never really had. When it was done, Dominic and I were left alone with him. "Is she your wife?" his father asked, looking at me. "No. Is she the woman Marco warned me about? The one who's made you weak?" Dominic didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached over and took my hand. "She's not my weakness," he said finally. "She's the reason I'm still human enough to have this conversation instead of letting you die in a hospital room without coming to watch it happen. That's not weak. That's the only leverage I have against everything I've become." His father died at 3:47 in the morning, with Dominic holding one hand and me holding the other. There was no drama to it, no last words or redemptive moment. Just a man running out of breath. We sat with him for another hour after he was gone, and Dominic didn't cry. But I felt him separate from his body, understood that he was moving into a space inside himself where he could manage this loss the way he managed everything else, through compartmentalization and control. The funeral was 5 days later, and that's when the next attack came. We were at the cemetery, standing in the rain while a priest said words that nobody believed, when Dominic's phone buzzed. He checked it and his hand found mine, gripping hard. "What?" I whispered. "The Eastern Docks. Someone just tried to take them." Marco's responding, but he trailed off, not needing to finish. If someone was making a move during the vulnerability of the funeral, they were either very confident or very desperate. He left immediately, and I stayed with Marco at his penthouse while operations unfolded through phone calls and encrypted messages that I was now trusted to overhear. The attack was being repelled. The attackers were being identified. By evening, it was clear that whoever had made the move had miscalculated catastrophically. Dominic came home at midnight, covered in other people's blood, and I made the decision to ask the question I'd been avoiding. "How many people did you kill today?" "9 that were direct action. 3 more that were collateral." He said it the way someone might report the weather. "Does that matter to you?" "I don't know," I said honestly. It probably should matter deeply, but I'm having trouble accessing the part of myself that's horrified right now. That's called adaptation. It's how people survive proximity to people like me. Eventually, the shock wears off and you're left with just the machinery of it." He moved to the window, looking out at the city he'd spent the day defending through violence. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly. If you stay with me, you're choosing this. You're choosing a life where the person you love comes home with blood on his hands, where people die because of decisions I made, where safety is a temporary condition and love is a liability." "I know? Do you?" "Because I don't think you do. I think you're infatuated with the idea of me, with the danger and the forbidden nature of it. But that wears off, and when it does, you're left with the reality of what I am." I moved to where he was standing and turned him to face me. "I also need to tell you something," I said. "You keep trying to talk me out of this because you're terrified that I'll stay and then get hurt. But that's not really what you're afraid of, is it? You're afraid that if I stay, if I choose this, then you become real. You become a man instead of a weapon. And that means you have to feel everything you've spent 20 years learning not to feel." He was quiet for a long moment. "If I become real," he said quietly, "if I let myself feel, I don't know what happens next. I don't know how to be a person, neither do I, but we could figure it out together." He kissed me then, and it was different than before, less desperate, less like he was trying to prove something. It was just 2 people choosing each other in the face of every reason not to. "Evangeline," he said against my mouth. "This is the point where I'm supposed to tell you to run, where I'm supposed to protect you by letting you go. I'm aware. I'm not going to do it. I know." He picked me up and carried me to the bedroom, and for the first time since we'd met, it wasn't violent or desperate. It was intimate in a way that suggested surrender, and I understood that this was what he'd been afraid of all along, not the loss of control, but the necessity of it. Somewhere in the city, People were dealing with the aftermath of violence. Somewhere, Marco was reorganizing power structures. Somewhere, enemies were plotting their next move. But in this room, in this moment, Dominic was just a man, and I was just a woman, and we were choosing each other. 3 months later, we were still alive. The war that everyone had predicted never fully came. Instead, something more interesting happened. The structure that Dominic and I represented became useful. The idea that there was someone in the organization capable of love, capable of being motivated by something other than profit and power, it shifted the conversation about what Dominic could do. He became something new, the enforcer with a human anchor. It sounds nicer than it was. It meant that Marco could use the fact that I existed as a way to predict Dominic's choices. It meant that other families understood they could negotiate by threatening me. It meant that the safety Dominic had tried to build was now weaponized by every other player on the board. But it also meant that he had something to live for beyond the machinery of crime. And slowly, so slowly that I almost didn't notice it happening, he started to become human. We moved out of the penthouse and into a brownstone in a neighborhood that was expensive but still pretended to be residential. Dominic hired someone to manage his properties. He started seeing a therapist, though he called it strategic consultation, and refused to acknowledge that it was actually just someone trying to help him process 30 years of trauma. I continued going to school. I audited the gallery restoration course and then another, and then Dominic funded a small studio where I could do restoration work on my own. I had something separate from him. I had a life that wasn't defined by proximity to his violence. It wasn't perfect. There were nights when he'd wake up screaming from nightmares I couldn't reach him in. There were days when the weight of everything he'd done would settle on him, and he'd disappear into himself completely. There were moments when I'd catch him looking at me with an expression that suggested he was still surprised I hadn't left. But we were building something. One evening in February, exactly 4 months after the night in the VIP room, Dominic came home early and found me in the studio, working on the restoration of an early 20th century painting that had been water damaged. He watched me work for a while without speaking, and then he said, "I've been thinking about what you said. About becoming real. And I think I'd like to do something that doesn't involve strategy or leverage or empire building. I think I'd like to do something just because it makes me happy." What would that be? He pulled something out of his jacket. A small wooden box. Old, clearly handmade. "I want to ask you to marry me," he said. "Not because it's strategically useful, or because it would make me easier to manipulate, or because love is supposed to be about that. I want to ask you because when I imagine my future, you're the only thing that makes sense in it." I didn't say yes. Not immediately. Instead, I asked, "If I say yes, do you understand what you're asking? You're asking me to be tied to you, to this life, to the city, to all of it. You're asking me to be your wife, which means I'm a target forever." "I know. And you still want that." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not flashy or expensive, but beautiful in the way that things made with actual intention are beautiful. "I still want that," he said. "But I want it with full awareness of what I'm asking. And I want you to say yes with full awareness of what you're saying yes to. So I'm going to ask again, will you marry me?" I said yes. Not because I'd stopped being afraid. Not because the danger had somehow evaporated or become manageable. I said yes because I understood that there were 2 kinds of people in the world, those who ran toward the people they loved, and those who ran away. I'd spent my whole life running toward things, toward beauty, toward knowledge, toward experiences that made me feel alive. Dominic was the furthest thing from safe, but he was real in a way that nothing else was. We got married quietly in a judge's chambers with only Marco present, and then we had a dinner at Luciano's, the place where everything had started, with a small group of people who mattered. My parents, who'd learned not to ask too many questions about what Dominic did. Marco and his wife. A few others from the organization who'd been vetted as not being part of whatever plot might be coming next. The VIP room had been renovated. The blood had been cleaned, the damage repaired. It looked like nothing had ever happened there. After dinner, when everyone had gone home, Dominic and I sat at the bar and ordered champagne. The manager left us alone, understanding that this was a moment that required privacy. "Do you regret it?" Dominic asked. "The choice to stay." "Not even a little," I said. "Though I suspect I will at some point. That's life, isn't it? Always some regret hiding underneath the good." "Probably." He took my hand and intertwined our fingers. "You know that I can't promise safety." "I know. You know that I can't promise to be gentle or uncomplicated." "I know that too, and you're still here." I confirmed. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that I'd never heard him say before. "I love you. Not strategically. Not instrumentally, just, I love you." The words hung in the air between us, and I understood that they cost him something, not theatrically, not because of fear, but because saying them meant acknowledging that he was vulnerable in a way he'd spent his entire adult life learning not to be. "I love you too," I said. The dangerous parts and the human parts and everything in between. We sat with that for a while, drinking champagne in a restaurant that had been the site of violence, and was now the site of peace, And I thought about how strange it was that my life had led me here. How a job I'd taken to pay rent had become the entryway to a world I never could have imagined. How a man I'd glimpsed bleeding had become the person I'd chosen to bleed beside. Outside, the city was conducting its business, its crime and corruption and careful, practiced darkness. But inside this restaurant, in this moment, there was just two people who'd found each other in the chaos, and decided that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The waiter brought the check. Dominic paid without looking at it. We walked out into the February night, into the rain that seemed to follow us like a metaphor for something we didn't need to name. His car was parked around the corner. We drove home in silence, and when we got there, Dominic turned to me and said, "What are you thinking?" "That I'm terrified," I said. "And that I'm happy. And that those two things don't cancel each other out." "No," he agreed. "They don't." He kissed me then, gently, like he was still learning how to do it without violence underneath. And I kissed him back, and in that kiss was everything, the danger and the tenderness, the trauma and the healing, the terrible beauty of two people choosing each other in the face of everything that said they shouldn't. In the distance, somewhere in the city, an alarm was ringing. A siren was wailing. The machinery of crime was continuing to turn. But here, in the warmth of the car, with Dominic's hand in mine and the future stretching out ahead of us, dark and unpredictable and entirely unknown, I felt something that I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that came with certainty. It was the kind that came with choosing to believe in something despite all evidence suggesting you shouldn't. And as Dominic drove us home through the neon-lit streets of the city we'd somehow made ours, I understood that this was where love lived, not in the safe spaces, but in the dangerous ones. Not in the absence of fear, but in the decision to move forward despite it. The city had made Dominic into a weapon. But I'd found the man underneath, and he'd found something in me that made him want to be more than that. And that was the only miracle the two of us would ever need.